Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are non-optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
And
speaking of non-optimized decks...
speaking of non-optimized decks, Bruce has brought along his deck that he's... I think it's the deck that I've seen play most out of him. It is Brudiclad, Telchor Engineer. So let's give a big round of applause for Brudiclad for doing a great job. For those who don't know, Brudiclad, we're just going to jump right into it. Brudiclad, Telchor Engineer is a legendary artifact creature, Artificer from C18, I believe. It's 4 blue and a red. It says, creature tokens you control have haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 blue mirror artifact creature token. Then, you may choose a token you control. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token, and it sits as a 4/4. That's the stat line is a 4/4. So basically, combat comes, you make a mirror, and then you can choose to take every single one of the tokens that you have, whether it's a creature or non, and turn them all into the same thing. But it has to be of a token that you control. So you can make them all mirrors, you can make them all treasures if that's what you have. But it has to be something you have. So this deck revolves around that, right?
Yes. Just to reiterate, the first line of text, creature tokens you control have haste. This is key to any Brudiclad deck. Because
it's funny because it's the line that I feel gets glossed over the most.
Right. And honestly, without that line, this deck is just hot garbage. This deck does all the amazing things that it does because you can take tokens that you have just created and they all get haste. So it allows for that instantaneous hit, whereas so many other decks or so many other tokens are, I created it, now I have to wait until they can attack. And it's a huge advantage with this deck that it really does have to be there.
I feel like it's every other game that you play this that somebody at the table is like, hey, didn't that just come out? And you're like, my tokens have haste. And it's like, yes, that's right. Why do we keep forgetting? And I think, like you said, without it, it's hot garbage. I think with it drastically turns this deck around. Let's jump in our time machine and go back to, I guess, late 2018 when this card came out.
Right.
And what caught your eye about Brudiclad? Brudiclad, if you will.
Well, actually, the term is Brudiclad.
Oh, sorry.
Because what caught my attention? I got to preview the card.
Whoa!
It was a card that was given to TCGPlayer while I was writing over there. A group of us all previewed the card, so there was a short video. Such a fun job! It was such a fun job when you got to be part of that whole preview set that they would put on. And I was given the opportunity to write about the card. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I asked them to do was I asked them to change the title. Just go into Photoshop, and we changed it from Brudiclad to Brudiclad. Just change the D to a C. And the picture that I was using, my headshot for TCGPlayer at the time, was it sort of looks like an Australian Outback hat and a Hawaiian shirt. So the folks there were good enough to take the image of Brudiclad and put a Hawaiian shirt on him with my hat. So ever since the card, even before anybody else had seen the card, I was already brewing for this card. And once you get a read for it and realize, okay, so any token creature that I make, I can now make all of my stuff into those. Think about where you can take that. Ooh, what if I make 6/6 tokens? Yep, you can make them all 6/6 tokens. What if I make it a flying creature? Yes, you can make them all flying creatures. And you go through that, and then at some point you stop and say, well, what about clue tokens? What about treasure tokens? What about any token? Not even just creature tokens, just any token. Yes, you can do that. Nowadays, you can make Jace tokens and make even more copies of those tokens with Brudiclad.
Don't tempt me, Bruce.
Exactly. What I really liked about the card was that you could build it in so many ways. There were just so many, and there were so many options. And if you're not looking to completely maximize it, then there really are. I mean, the options are just about endless. Anyways, that's where it all got started.
That's awesome. I honestly didn't know that. And we'll have a link to the TCG article in the show notes. But it's funny because I feel like where I had first heard of your Brudiclad decks were probably, let's see, almost a year and a half later, in September 2019, you decided to do a 3-part article for Cool Stuff Inc., which also links in the show notes. And it really seems like you were taking the ideas from your TCGPlayer deck or ideas and trying to form it into something bigger, better, probably, something more refined, so that it's not just like, hey, we're going to make tokens, and then the idea is just lots of tokens. Whatever the tokens end up being, that whatever. It seemed like you wanted to refine it. And I liked the idea of a 3-part series where the audience essentially follows your progression from scratch. So why don't you kind of give us an overview of how the deck started and where it is now, and how kind of it got there. I know that's vague.
So many articles had been... It started more about the article format than it did about the deck list. I wanted to go deeper as far as the deck building aspect. Most articles are somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 words. And I just felt like in 2,000 words, you can, all you really do is get to say, okay, here's the deck. Here's a few comments about some of the cards in the deck. Maybe you've played it a couple times and just say, I think this and this about the deck so far. I've done this. So,
like some sort of like showcase, but it's just, that's all it is. No real huge insight, nothing groundbreaking.
No, it was, it just, I didn't feel like there were enough words there to really make it into something. And I really wanted to try and bring the reader along with me on the deck building, as we build the deck together. So I opted to split it into three topics or 3 articles. And the first one was just sort of, let's focus on the commander. Let's focus on what the strengths and weaknesses of the commander. How do you make that work? How does that tie in? And then and then in the second one, it was like, okay, we know what the strengths and weaknesses are. How do we buffer up the strengths, and how do we protect it from its weaknesses, and sort of go from there? And then the final one is, okay, well, here's the list. How did it play? Because I also wanted to have some games in on it. As anybody who writes articles week after week after week can tell you, at some point you're writing deck lists for articles that or for decks that you're not building. These are just, here's my idea, here's my deck list, it's untested. And, that's great when you're just looking to provide some ideas, but it's not battle tested. So you kind of want to do that. So it was something I wanted to try. But in any event, that's sort of where it went. And I chose Brudiclad because it was a card that I was still working with. I'd had some experience playing. I knew there were additions and some deletions that I wanted to put with the deck, so I knew it was a card that would be ripe for that sort of format. So I ran with it.
When you decided that you wanted to use Brudiclad as this commander to improve upon for this idea, we've talked a little bit about deck building in general before, but like, where did you start specifically with Brudiclad? I mean, there's so much to him that, like what was your first thoughts? What were your first ideas into putting things in the deck?
The first idea, or the way I kind of wanted to start it, I mean, the focus was just producing enough tokens. I wanted cards that were going to make tokens. Ideally, I wanted those cards to be, something that would make a really cool token. So, so finding cards like, Mere Battlesphere, I think, is just sort of an automatic that goes into virtually every Brudiclad deck. I wanted a card like Thopter Assembly because, one, it gives you flyers. Two, you can use Brudiclad to get rid of all of the Thopters, turn them into treasure, turn them into something else. And then suddenly the card is by itself without any Thopters. So then you get to loop it through again. It was just all sorts of interesting interactions that I liked. And then you find other cards that sort of tie into the same theme. It didn't take long before I started to realize that what would make Brudiclad really cool was to go that next step. Cards like Helm of the Host. Because Helm of the Host is going to create a token that's a copy of a copy of one of your cards, but it creates a token that wouldn't normally exist. So, when you think Brudiclad, you're thinking about Thopters and Mirror and any other, a goblin token or something along that line. You think of the standard token creatures.
Yeah, your 1/1s, 1/2s, 2/2s, etc.
Well,
like
why not
small? Yeah,
exactly. So why not ramp it up? So why not take a card like Mere Battlesphere, for example, and put Helm of the Host on it? Because now you've got a token copy of Mere Battlesphere. So suddenly, you can create multiple copies of Mere Battlesphere. Now, sure, they turn into it; they don't come into play. But when it's attacked, you get so many more options of what you can and can't do because of that. In this case, you can make a copy of Persistent Petitioners, and then suddenly you're able to use all of those token copies to start milling an opponent.
You can make copies of Brudiclad himself.
Well, he is legendary. Now, I know that with Helm of the Host that doesn't matter, but it's there. I started looking at other cards to sort of go down that route. The one thing I knew I didn't want to create a deck where I'm always searching for just that one creature, because that's always going to be the best option, because that's always the most fun. I'm like, no, let's not do that. So I know in some of the early iterations of the deck, I actually toned it way down and spent a lot of cards creating copies or allowing me to steal a creature an opponent controls and make a copy of it, because I wanted a token copy. And I thought, how original will this be? Because it means that I'll always be getting something different based on what my opponents are playing.
Yeah.
I mean, what if I can make 20 token copies of Blood Artist? Or picture any creature an opponent controls. There was one we were playing with just recently. I don't remember the name, but it gives all of your creatures exalted. So you end up making a token copy of it, and then just swinging with even just one of your tokens. because the Exalted trigger kicks in, and it kicks in for all of the cards. It's just all kinds of weird interactions and, you know, bizarre things that force you to think outside the box.
Either Sublime Archangel or Battle Grace Angel.
Sublime Archangel, I think, was the one I was.
Oh yeah, that's what it says. Other creatures you have exalted.
Right. So I mean,
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it was just kind of cool. But to be able to make copies of those, I mean, that would happen in one game, but it wouldn't be available in the next game. So that's sort of what I was targeting initially.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see that with Followed Footsteps, enchant creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a token that's a copy. So it's like things like that, where you can, you know, either steal somebody's things or, like you said,
right. Like
more likely you'd want to make a token copy of something that somebody else has, especially if it's big, especially if it's spicy.
Right, and that's the reason Mimic that is in the deck.
Right.
So, you know, a creature dies, you can look at it. Not only does Mimic that take it away from them so they can't reincarnate it immediately, but it gives you the option to make token versions. I mean, I would love to get the opportunity to get a Grave Titan under the Mimic that and turn even 5 tokens into Grave Titans. And then you're swinging with 5 Grave Titans, and they're all going to get you, what is it? I think it's 2 zombie tokens every time Grave Titan attacks.
Oh, yeah.
So then you're getting 10 zombie tokens, and if you can hang on to that Mimic that for one round, all those 10 tokens then become 10 Titans in the following swing. So this is, you know, these are all sorts of, you know, weird and funky interactions that I was just dying to do. I really got sold on the idea of the Bazaar when I was able to make a copy of somebody's Soul Ring. And I ended up with 5 Soul Rings.
Yeah.
Which let me tap for, you know, that's 10 mana. That goes a long way in a mana hungry deck like this. So it was just kind of fun.
And I think, like, I love the idea that the deck is revolved around the interaction of Brudiclad and other people's decks. I love the idea that you are essentially submitting to the chaos of the table rather than, you know, searching through your own deck and trying to find, like, X creature to then make, you know, hopefully big tokens.
Well, it's part of the reason why I like using Brudiclad over a lot of my other decks when I'm playing against people that I don't necessarily know very well.
Yeah.
Jason Alt has talked about his 75% theory as 75% decks, and I like the concept that idea that you have a deck that essentially expands or shrinks in power based on what your opponents are playing. Well, I mean, that's exactly what Brudiclad was doing. You know, if the cards my opponents were playing were lousy, there was only so much that I could do. But as soon as they start playing more powerful decks and more powerful cards and creatures, then I can then some of the interactions you see with Brudiclad get even bigger. So,
did that ever make you feel like you were just playing a game of catch up?
A little bit. What more often happened was I felt like I was playing a game where decks get better because they play better cards and because they have better interactions between those cards. Brudiclad doesn't really capitalize on good interactions between the cards. Brudiclad copies one card and all of your copies are that card. So it's not as though a deck where 2 or 3 or even 4 cards interact to create this amazing thing. Well, Brudiclad doesn't do anything with that because he only takes one of those, or he can only copy one of those. So you get something, but it's not nearly as good. And what I was finding was I was playing against opponents whose decks didn't offer up a lot of juicy targets. just because their decks were designed to work with the cards in that deck. So I wasn't getting that interaction. So I actually did pull back a little bit on that and made sure that I included a few, what I would call good targets in my own deck, so that I can, so that I have stuff to go after. If I'm not seeing something that my opponents are playing, then I have something to do. So
I mean, I've seen this deck go off with Dragon Master Outcast, where I think you ended up winning the game with something like 19 5/5 dragons. Dragon Master Outcast says, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 5/5, and then by the time combat rolls around, you change all of your tokens to it. It seems like it could very easily get to 19. Flying 5/5s are extremely dangerous.
Right. So if you've got 6 or more lands, there's a good chance that I probably played Brass's Bounty the turn before. So, I've got at that point, I've got 7 or 8 lands. I've made 7 or 8 treasures. They're sitting there, and then you play, and then before you end your turn, you play the Dragon Master Outcast, even if you have to use one of the treasures to do it. And then on the following turn, you hit the upkeep. There's the 5/5 dragon. It has haste because Brudiclad says so. And suddenly those, 6 remaining treasure tokens become dragons along with the 2/1 mirror. Well, now I'm swinging with 8 5/5 red dragons. I mean, that's 40 points of damage. Realistically, at that point, I am able to kill somebody on that table. And I know I just described a series of cards that make it sound like this is Magical Christmas Land. That can't happen. And you're sort of right and you're sort of not. Because the deck has plenty of other ways. They don't have to be treasure tokens. They could be, maybe they were mirror creatures from a different card. Maybe they're just a series of tokens that I happen to have. You
got Tempt with Vengeance. You've got, Rite of Replication. You've got so many ways to make creature tokens.
Right.
That, it's easy to wind up with a lot.
And it's difficult. It becomes difficult for your opponents to sort of figure out what you're doing. Well, even if with say the Extortionist is out.
Yeah.
You go through the upkeep, the 5/5 dragon. They look at the 5/5 dragon, they're like, oh, he's going to make everything into 5/5 dragons. And then they look to figure out what everything is. And they look around the board and they're like, okay, there's only 3 tokens here. So we're looking at probably 3 dragons. Okay. But almost every card that I am almost guaranteed to have a card in hand that's going to make at least 1 or 2 more tokens. So that 3 goes to 5. And a lot of people just forget, because it happens every single time, there's going to be a mirror token coming into play at the beginning of combat. So that's another dragon that gets forgotten. So what, on a table where I only had 3 tokens, when combat comes around, I've probably got 6. And when you're talking about a 5/5 dragon token, well, that sort of damage piles up really fast.
What was the next step? What was the thing that you found to be the weakest spot that you needed to improve on? Whether it's, making it a little more consistent or...
The ramp package, to me, has always been a struggle. Whenever, whether it's the ramp package, whether it's card draw, whether it's removal, I always want to make it tie into the theme of the deck. So a ramp package, I always want to have it. It's okay. Well, how can that also add to the token count? Well, the obvious answer are treasure. I mean, you can also use gold, I suppose, but generally speaking, treasure is where I'm aiming. The problem is then at some point in the game, you get to that point where you're struggling, because are you going to use the treasure to bring out your cards, And, if you have 5 treasures sitting there, do you sack the 5 for the 5 mana, knowing that you now have 5 fewer tokens to use during your combat? Or, on the other hand, when you get to combat and you've got 5 treasures and you're thinking about how you're going to use that mana on the next step, it means you can't use Brudiclad because all tokens change. You don't get to keep some as treasure and some attacking unless you don't change anything. And if you're not changing anything, then Brudiclad's a waste. Brudiclad is an all or nothing kind of deck. So it leads to these weird conundrums, and I keep struggling with how much ramp is needed for the deck, and whether or not moving away from or stop, just not including treasure tokens as part of the ramp package makes more sense. So
yeah, I mean it's a tough balance to make, because I mean Brudiclad himself costs 6 mana, and that's for the first time.
Yeah,
and so like after that you kind of do need some sort of ramp package. Personally, I think that the treasure gives somewhat of a flexibility, because like sure you like it is an all or nothing situation where if you have treasure tokens out, you have to change all of them or change none of them. It's a bit of restriction and flexibility. It's restricted in that it ends up that you have to play some things that you don't necessarily want to play on your first main phase, forcing you to play it on your first main phase. But also, it is giving you that flexibility of either trying to figure out if you want to use them as mana-producing sack rocks, or turn them into, at worst, a 2/1 blue mirror. But I personally love the flexibility.
Well, I do too, because I mean there are times when you do want to run. It's like, okay, we're all in, let's go, and or this is the turn when we can make it happen. So you just make it happen. But I don't know.
Yeah.
So
before we go on, let's jump over to our sponsor for this episode. And when we get back, Bruce is going to share with us his favorite and most impressive feat he's ever done with this deck. So we'll be right back. This episode of Temple of Valspod is brought to you by Sai, Master Thopterus. Hey, Sai here. Got yourself a thing? Put some wings on it. Bam, you got a new Thopter on your hands. Done with that trick? Go get yourself some more cards. I'm Sai, signing out. Make some Thopters. And now back to you.
Thanks, Sai. Really appreciate the support.
Well worded, Sai. So, Bruce.
Yes.
This deck, it's beautiful. It's big. It's red and blue.
Yeah.
We've already talked about having 19 dragons, 4 soul rings. What has been your favorite thing that you've done with this deck in terms of gameplay?
7 dwarves.
You had 7 dwarves?
No, I had a lot more than 7 dwarves.
Do you want me to tell you how many copies you had?
Yeah. Let's
15. 15.
So 15 copies of 7 dwarves, and the name on this card is just a misnomer. There aren't 7 dwarves in the picture. There aren't. It's just I really, really despise that, because if I had 15 copies of the card, wouldn't that mean I had like 105 dwarves? Did I have 105, or did I just have 15 copies of 7 dwarves?
Who can tell?
Who can tell? Who can tell? I saw when Seven Dwarves came out, I saw it and I thought, okay, this has got to go in the deck. And I was like, I don't want 7 copies of it because I don't want it to be redundant. The whole point isn't to get multiple copies of the card. The point is to get at least one of them, turn at least one of them into a token creature.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to do that, and it worked out that I had a whole lot of other tokens at the time. Changed them all into...
You're telling me.
Each of them into 7 dwarves. Now, 7 dwarves gets +1/+1 for each other creature named 7 dwarves you control. A deck can have up to 7 cards named 7 dwarves. Who cares about the second part? +1/+1 for each other creature named 7 dwarves you control. Now, if this is Commander, 7 dwarves rarely comes up. But when you can make copies of it, 15 copies of it, that means each of those dwarves was getting +15/+15, which means they were 17 dwarves.
At least.
Right. Now, I don't believe they had trample. I don't remember. I can't remember if this was a deck when something else was also in play, but...
I think we were playing Plane Chase with it. So I think they ended up being slightly more. Or maybe they had Double Strike or something. I don't remember.
There was something else that was happening. But in any event, even without the trample, 15 of these means that some of them are going to get through, and each one by itself does a boatload of damage. And it took one swing to win the game. So,
do you want to name all 15 dwarves?
No.
How about all? What'd you say? 135.
It was it would have been 105 dwarves. So no.
Figured I'd ask. No. That. Oh God. That it just. Those. I mean, those are the plays that you live for as an EDH player.
And the best part with this deck is that those plays happen. The deck is designed to make those plays happen over and over again because, I've had other times when other options came up. The Locust God is in the deck. So, I was able to create my own swarm of, my own literal locust of insects. I have, more recently, I was able to make a token copy of the Sharding Sphinx and had multiple Sharding Sphinx, as I said, sharding all over my opponents.
Fun fact. The plural of sphinx is a gross word called sphinges.
Ooh. So I had many sharding sphinges, which is almost better. And so, I look forward to opportunities to make, these ridiculous multiple copies of cards that wouldn't normally see multiple copies, and then just swing in with the bunch. These are the memorable moments. These are the ones you get to
absolutely.
You get to focus on and relive again and again.
As your opponent, it's so hard to be mad at these plays because it's just so absurd. Like they're so you won't have that interaction specifically ever again. Like I remember one game you had 18 10-10 Eldrazi. Like how often is that going to happen?
Right, and this is in a deck that doesn't have any Eldrazi. I copied somebody else's. Made a token of it and went crazy. It was...
boom, ba boom.
Yeah.
And I love to, especially with things like Sharding Sphinx, where if you make a copy of it and then you have, X number of tokens, so then you have X number of Sharding Sphinges, they do the combat damage, you make more tokens, and then you do it all over again with more numbers. It's just...
Right, and that's actually how Sharding Sphinx got as big as it was.
Yeah.
That's how the numbers got that crazy in that particular game, because I swung once, and I think I made 5 or 6 Thopters. And was able to then swing again for a ridiculous volume of numbers. And we didn't even bother counting how many Thopters it created because the game ended at that point. But yeah, I mean, it's just wild. I love that kind of stuff.
Do you have a card in this deck that is kind of your secret ingredient, your low key favorite card?
At this point, I would say whichever card happens to be in my hand at the time, kind of thing. But that's not really fair.
Have you won with Hellkite Tyrant?
I have not won with Hellkite Tyrant.
Hellkite Tyrant says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Which, I mean, if you're making as many tokens as you can, should be pretty easy. I mean, it's a similar concept to Revel in Riches, but it's red,
right?
And it's 20 instead of 10 specifically treasure tokens. But I'm rooting for you on that one.
Yeah, I would love to see that one come through. Card I kind of like is Tempt with Vengeance, and realistically, nobody is tempted ever because
I've been tempted,
right? But the only time you find somebody who is actually willing to go with you on Tempt with Vengeance, and just so you know, Tempt with Vengeance is it costs X and a red. It's a sorcery. It says put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Each opponent may put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. For each player who does, put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. So if I put 6 into this, if I make X 5, I get 5 1/1 elemental creature tokens with haste. Not that matters. Brudiclad's out there. But I get that with haste. And if I convince even one of my opponents to also do it, then I get 5 more. And it really doesn't matter that they have a bunch of 1/1 red elemental creature tokens, because those 10 1/1 red elemental creature tokens are not going to be 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. By the time they go to combat, they're going to be turned into, say, Thopters that can't get blocked. Or, I don't know, Sphinges, sharding Sphinges, maybe. Or whatever else. And I love that option. And I realize that almost no one is ever going to agree to do that unless you're in a very unique situation where somebody's got to go and it ain't you.
Yeah, I think the situation that I was in when I've generally taken this this offer, if you will, this tempting offer, is I mean, I'm playing Teysa, so the more creatures I have, the better. But adding 5 more or whatever, X more to yours is always a hurdle I have to get over.
Another one that I really enjoy, but almost never get to play it, is Clone Legion.
Ooh.
Clone Legion costs 9 mana. Now,
what?
Yeah, exactly. It's irrelevant that it's 7 and 2 blue. It's not at 9 mana. That it's 9 mana.
Right.
It's a sorcery.
You're gonna have the 2 blue.
Right. It's a sorcery, and it just says for each creature target player controls, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So this means if I have a really cool creature that I want to make all of my creatures into, I can use Clone Legion, because Clone Legion will make 1 copy of each of the creatures, which in and of itself is kind of cool. But with Brudiclad out there, it means that all those different tokens are all going to be the best one, when it comes time for combat. Oh, and they'll all have haste. I mean, there's a part of me that that desperately wants to use Clone Legion against somebody who's running a token deck. So you'll get somebody who's got
Avenger of Zendikar.
Thank you. And it's a bunch of plants. Now, you don't get to copy all the +1/+1 counters that are on the plant. You just get the 0/1 plant. That's fine. I'll happily take 8, 9 copies of that plant, plus a copy of Avenger, plus a copy of every other creature they have, and then turn them all into one big nasty creature. Maybe it's a creature that I already control. Maybe it's whatever. So there's just so many different ways to use the Clone Legion, and I really like that. It just at 9 mana, you get one shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
It's great.
Yeah.
We've talked so much about the sordid past of this deck. What are you looking to do next with it? Is there any cards that you're eyeing?
Nothing in particular. Seven Dwarfs was a card that I was sort of eyeing for the deck. Got it, put it in, and then was lucky enough I think it was within 3 or 4 games of putting it in, I actually got to draw it and got a chance to actually see it in action and have it do what it does. And I love that. I thought that was great. Andy, by the way,
Yeah.
in that section where I said this deck doesn't have any Eldrazi, it does. Idol of Oblivion, it creates the 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token that I probably made multiple copies of. So, so, when you've got Idol of Oblivion running in your deck, you can do that too. But either way.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about Bob?
Yeah, let's talk about Bob.
Let's talk about Bob. Bruce, you tweeted out once. It says, does Bob, B.O.B, which refers to the card from unsanctioned B.O.B, parentheses, bevy of Beebles, end parentheses. It's a 3 blue, legendary planeswalker, B.O.B. As B.O.B, bevy of beetles, enters a battlefield, create 4 1/1 blue Beeble. Jeez. 4 1/1 blue Beeble creature tokens. The number of loyalty counters on B.O.B is equal to the number of Beebles you control. Create or sacrifice Beebles whenever B.O.B gains or loses loyalty. It has a +1 that says up to X target Beebles can't be blocked this turn when X or where X is the number of cards in your hand. -1. Draw a card. So the rest of your tweet says, does B.O.B belong in Brudiclad? I'm thinking the chuckle value is enough. And I think it's a swell card. It is silver bordered. I have no problem with silver bordered as long as you're keeping it in check. What are your thoughts on this card, or at least what were your thoughts compared to what your thoughts are now?
It's kind of interesting because when I remember this, and when I first tweeted it, all I was picturing was, hey, it creates 4 Beebles, and then and then it would have a number of loyalty counters equal to the number of Beebles I control. Well, then I can change all my other stuff into Beebles, and the loyalty count on this thing would go through the roof. Unfortunately, bevy of Beebles...
There's not really a payoff.
Exactly. There's no real payoff. The fact that, bevy of Beebles suddenly has a loyalty count of 26 doesn't mean that you can change anything. It just means you get 26 card draws over 26 turns. Realistically, you can get the same effect by having, if you only have 4 Beebles. It just doesn't matter. I appreciate that, adding, +1 means you get to add a Beeble. Well, great. The problem was, and I thought this was going to be really cool. I was just picturing all kinds of interactions and all these unblockable creatures and on and on and on. And then I remembered once again, Brudiclad is all or nothing. So either all of your stuff are Beebles, or none of your stuff is are Beebles. And if you have no Beebles, then there are no loyalty counters on Bob. And then Bob dies.
No.
So in the end, it comes down to Bevy of Beebles is a 5-mana planeswalker that says get 4 1/1 tokens, get 3 1/1 tokens, draw a card. Because you're going to kill
because you have to sacrifice it.
Yeah, when you reduce the loyalty. Because then you'll only have 3, and then you're probably going to change them into something scary and nasty, and then Bob dies. And, maybe 5 mana is worth it. Maybe it is worth it to do that. I don't know. I just looked at that and I thought, this isn't spectacular. And right now, Brudiclad doesn't have any other cards. So it's not a deck where I feel like I need to ask, are you okay if I run cards in it? Some people aren't. And sometimes I would rather just not have to ask the question. And so right now, my stance is sort of, I'm not going to run Bob, but...
like best case scenario, you're just kind of spinning your wheels with it. You've got like a lot of Beebles and you have a high, loyalty count, but it's not like you still have just a pile of 1/1s and it's not doing the thing that your deck wants it to do.
Right. Bob is nowhere near broken, which is good because you don't want broken cards from your uncards and leaving people with a bad taste in their mouth. It's like, why did I let him play these uncards? It's just broken. But it also doesn't create that wow moment. We're talking about 4 more Beebles. 4 Beebles. That's what we're talking about. Unless you really want to play into it. And if you're playing into it, then you are sort of sacrificing the idea of getting that big win. And instead going for the, oh my god, I don't believe it. I made like 300 Beebles. Huh. And hey, more power to you. If that's how you want to run it, go for it. I am all in favor of that because that's a moment you won't soon forget. But most of the moments that I've been building with this deck have been a massive number of creatures that we're able to then swing in. Now, on that note, I do have Eldrazi, where is it here? Eldrazi Monument. And Eldrazi Monument will let you take a sizable handful of Beebles, say 10 Beebles, and suddenly you're getting
2/2 flying indestructibles.
Right. And the idea that you're sacking one of them on your upkeep is not that big a deal. Because
you're just going to get another one with...
You're going to give them +1, hopefully be able to make most of them unblockable.
Yeah.
On top of the flying indestructible and +1. And swing in for nasty amounts. And I do like that idea. It is very much a one-shot kind of deal, and I like the cards to be maybe do a little more than that. We'll see.
Hardly any flexibility. It seems like a moderately costed draw spell, which, thinking about it, it doesn't even seem too expensive for a single draw because you are also getting 3 tokens out of it. So it's not great, but it's not as bad as 5 mana draw. It's 5 mana draw and 3 tokens.
Right.
But I have run out of questions, Bruce. I love this deck to death.
I'm glad we could answer all of your questions about Brudiclad.
I am fully equipped to take on the beast that is the Brudiclad deck. The Brudiclad, is that what it was?
Brudiclad.
The Brudiclad deck. I'm looking forward to the next time I play against it, as always, because it creates those moments that you don't generally get really anywhere else in EDH, where you just have, I mean, like we said, 19 5/5 dragons. Like, where else are you going to get that? And Brudiclad makes it look so easy. It's a fun deck that sometimes just comes out of nowhere, because you're not looking at these 2/1 mirrors as anything of a threat until the beginning of combat, when they all change into something huge, and it's like, oh damn, which is so rad. Do you have anything else you want to say about this deck?
I think when I mentioned the flexibility on the deck earlier, this is something that I really like about the deck. I think that there is, I think to every Brudiclad deck there is a core. I think you have to have a ramp. You have to have a really solid ramp package. The deck only functions when Brudiclad is out there, and at 6 mana to cast initially, you have to be ready to pay 8 and 10 mana to really make the deck run. So make sure you've got your core in place. The thing is that the cards you use otherwise, so the ones you use to make the token creature to begin with, the ones you use that are the target of cards that make the token creature, so the big ugly creature or whatever, those are all those cards are flexible. They can come in and out of the deck by your whim. So just sort of, what do you think would look cool this week? And run that. I mean, Hellkite Tyrant is still in the deck because I haven't had a chance to actually make a token copy of it and try and win. But once I do, there's nothing saying it'll stay there. I mean, 7 dwarves can come out now. I did it. Doing it another time, well, I mean, I think it's still going to be pretty awesome, but I have done it once, so maybe I want to take it out. Maybe I want to try a different option, and find a different fun way to try and pull off this craziness. It also allows for each person to build it according to what they have. A lot of these cards initially made the cut solely because they were cards I had. I mean, Mere Battlesphere would have made the cut anyway, but it definitely got in because I had a copy of it. I mean, Wormcoil Engine would have jumped into this deck. I have copies of it. I just didn't have a spare one at the time. So that card isn't in the deck. Not because it's bad, but I just didn't have one. And I love decks where you can almost run your own little sideboard, and you take these 10 cards out and put these 10 cards in, and it just creates a different play experience for you and for your play group if they're getting tired of seeing that same group of cards coming in with Brudiclad over and over. You can make dramatic changes to the deck across the board without destroying the resiliency, as long as you leave your card draw and your ramp package together. Everything you choose to copy can be wildly different.
Yeah, very modular.
Yeah,
like you take some things out, put other things back in, and
right,
vice versa. And
so, and like I've said with the previous deck that we've looked at, I don't recommend that you make a copy of this deck card for card. Like I said, there are better versions. If you're looking to really optimize it, you can do that, but you certainly won't be doing that by making a 1-for-1 copy of this deck. Take it as it's intended. It was meant to be a deck to give you ideas, to give you the impetus to go out there and make it your own.
Yeah.
So
cool. I think Brudiclad is your one of your top 3 like decks that just exemplify the Bruce method for me, where it's like I think of Bruce And I think of, Buzzbark, I think of Grenzo, and I think of Brudiclad. And I look forward to future iterations on this deck. But I think that's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And we are the Temple of the False Pod, where our decks clearly are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun.
Obviously.
Obviously. Thank you so much for listening tonight. Thank you to our sponsor, Master Thopterist. Go check him out. And have a great night. And may your fifth land be the Temple.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is FalsePodMTG, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite Magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the Temple.